Okay, so I guess at some point in time in our career, we've all wondered what this mysterious process of mastering our tracks is. And somehow it's going to take what we've done in our studio and in our environment with our gear and make it into a finished product, something that can sound as good as a hit on the radio or on the internet, right? So many producers, when they're starting out, musicians when they're starting out, do their music at their house or at their home studio the best that they can, right? Like they make it sound really good at their studio and on headphones, and then they suddenly take a reference track when they're doing a reality check and realize that, oh my god, my track is not as punchy or not as loud or not as clear or as wide as a finished product which is doing really well on the internet or on radio, right? So that's the need. I think that's the point where something like this arises in the mind of a musician, where they wonder, so I need to get my track mastered. I need to get a process which takes my track from where it is right now to sounding as good as a hit on radio. So I'm going to demystify this further for you in just a moment. Stay tuned. So in order to understand mastering, we must go back in the day as to what this term is and where it really came from. So the need for mastering a track basically came from the era or from the zone of making albums or actual records, which meant multiple songs on one LP or on a cassette. So when you're doing multiple songs recorded by various engineers, done by various musicians, and you're putting it all together, they are bound to have sonic differences, right? Something's gonna leap out, something's gonna be softer, something's gonna be louder, right? So in order to make all of that even so that the listening experience of the user or of the audience is smooth and they're not like constantly turning up or turning down the volume when they're listening. So that was the need for mastering back in the day, where a mastering engineer would take all the tracks and make them sonically pretty even. So it's a nice experience. The other reason was that a lot of these tracks were cut to lathe, basically to an LP, right? To a record. So physical vinyl record has its own limitations as a physical medium, where certain things cannot be very wide in stereo. The bass, it can only take to a certain extent, and same with the levels. Otherwise it starts cutting grooves which are like very wide or jumbled up. Today, thanks to the internet, one doesn't have to create an entire album to put it out there. You can actually put out a single. And so the term mastering and the need for mastering has completely changed in context to what used to happen before. So at this point in time, people really want their master to sound as wide, as loud, as punchy as a lot of commercial hits, so that when their track is playing, they don't feel that their song didn't get a chance because sonically it was not as good or as loud or as punchy or as wide as a particular hit on the market. So because of this change and because of singles coming out, there are basically two approaches to mastering at this point in time. The most favorable or the most optimal approach is basically to go to a great mastering engineer. Okay, a great mastering engineer with a great pair of ears and the right equipment can turn a basic recording that you've done at home, which sounds even and nice, into a really bombastic sonic experience. So there's absolutely no shortcut to that. If you can find the right engineer at the right price who has the right gear, they can make magic. Now, the second approach is basically a more homegrown approach. Now, let me tell you something. A lot of hits that you hear on radio, especially underground music, which has now become foreground, has actually been mastered at home. I can bet you that many of those hits have never reached the table of a super mastering engineer. Why? Because the time that a producer was creating that hit, they didn't know that it was a hit. And it did it to the best of their own ability, using the gear they had at their studio, and of course, having the skill to do it right at home. And then it played on the radio. So when it's on the radio or on YouTube, nobody really cared who mastered it and what the levels are. If it sounded good and it sounded right and probably translated well to various systems, then that's it, So a lot of hits, actually, if you take them and you take them apart, a lot of mastering engineers will scream because they'll be like, oh, this is all wrong. It's got all reds in it. It's got this frequency bumping out. It's got that problem. But did the audience care? No. So why I'm saying this is that don't think that if you're not able to sum up the budget to take it to a pro, which of course is the ideal thing to do, but if you can't, that doesn't mean that you can't release your song, or it's not something that you can fix at home. So here in this example, I'm going to show you how to really take very simple processes with a very simple plugin that we have and create a very authentic master. Now, just to bring a new twist into this whole example, I'm going to show you a piece of music that I've actually tracked and recorded through a lot of outboard and actually mixed on a physical analog mixer. So I've done everything pretty much in the analog domain, and then I'm bringing it back after mixing it in the analog domain to digital and mastering with this plugin. So that's the amount of confidence I have in showing you that you can actually even take an analog recording and make it sound better with a digital process. Okay, folks, so here I am at my workstation. I've got the track loaded that I just mixed using my analog console and some outboard. We're going to now master it using Slam XL, a plugin that Beatskillz makes, that is, we make. And it's got a bunch of simple processes, but the result is not simple. It's really going to be really cool. So I'm going to bypass the plugin every time I make some changes to get you to hear the difference, and then switch it back on and then move ahead to different sections. Okay, so let's get started with Slam XL. So till now I just added saturation, a little bit of saturation to add a little richness to the sound. Next thing I want to use is a bit of stereo expansion and expand the image a little bit. Okay, so let's listen. So I'm sure you definitely heard that. I hope you're using some headphones or studio monitors. Did you see how the image just expanded? What I did is I took the higher bands and a crossover and expanded the higher frequency range. And then I took the lower frequency range, right, and the lows, and made it slightly mono. Means I centered my bass and kick everywhere in the center and expanded the higher parts, which basically gives the illusion or the apparent experience of space and things being more wide. So without, again, I said, losing mono compatibility. If you mono compatible this, it's going to work. Okay, so that's it. Now let's go on to the limiter section. There's a compressor here, but I don't feel the need to use it. I'm just trying to go for that 70s kind of sound, tapey kind of sound. So that's what I'm doing. Let's go to the limiter and expand the levels. Sorry for that jump. Just gonna bring down the output level a little bit and increase the apparent loudness with the limiter. Now here's the magic. If you notice that the peak levels actually of our bypass signal was more than the mastered signal with Slam XL. But the levels with Slam XL are louder. They're actually coming out of the speakers more. So that's what a limiter does. It's gonna capture the peaks and just inflate the sound overall if that's the effect you're looking for. So in this case, yes, I'm definitely looking for some loudness. So I've pulled it through. Now the last thing I'm going to do is use a little bit of touch-up EQ. Bring up the top end a little bit, bring up the bottom end a little bit, dip the mids a little, very slightly. Let's see what happens. So I hope that impressed the hell out of you. Again, like I said, I'm going for a kind of sound which is 70s, hit to tape, large, wide. I'm kind of go extreme with certain settings. I know people want slightly subtle things in certain cases. You're welcome to try that. But the idea was not to prove how good a mastering engineer I am. The idea is to prove that simple processes can really change the sound. And you can do that right at home with a bunch of simple plugins. You really don't need to go really complex with those crazy, plugins with multiple parameters and then wonder what, artistry or scientific experiment you have to do to make it sound good. So this is how you can actually make a hit right at home. I hope this was useful. Of course, try this plugin, try other plugins, whatever suits your workflow the best, use that. But most importantly, have the confidence that you can do it. You can do it all by yourself if you don't have the budget. So of course, like I said, it does not diminish the need for a great mastering engineer. If you can afford one, don't even think about it. Go to a great mastering engineer. But if you can't, Don't restrict yourself from making your next hit. So I hope that was interesting and that uplifted your spirits. Go do your music, go do your production, and have fun. And I'll see you in another video. Ciao.